Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about the Stihl USG grinder using Hexa chain from Stihl, and you have to get a Hexa wheel for it. So the standard wheel that you get is only 4mm thickness, and a Hexa wheel is 5mm in thickness, so it's an extra mil thicker. The wheel itself, and we'll change the wheels over, so it's pretty simple to do that on a Stihl. You don't have to worry about that little grub screw that they have on the Oregon. You've got this fairly large thumb nut here, left-hand thread. Just undo that. Slowly pull that off. And we'll put the Hexa on. Tighten that up. I really do like this idea. It's fairly straightforward and simple. Now we'll just come in a little bit closer. You can see the 120 degrees that's on that wheel, the V. That V is 120 degrees, 60 degrees aside. But we don't use that V to actually grind into the tooth. We use the side of the wheel, so we use this side here and this side here, which is 120 degrees. So that's what we do, and this is a brand new wheel. And periodically you need to check with this type of Stihl gauge. This is the Hexa gauge that comes with the Stihl, and you need to fit that in there like that, and that looks pretty good. Nothing wrong with that. That's pretty good. If it's out a little bit, look, I can see that there's a slight difference, very, very slight difference on that side. Looks like it's slightly shorter by a fraction of a millimeter. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we've set this up. So we set the angle of the head, the grinding head, at 25 degrees, which is the same on an Oregon as 65 degrees, because Stihl use 0 degrees reference point for their vertical, and Oregon use 90 degrees for their reference point vertical. So we set it at 25 degrees. And we also set the top plate at 25 degrees. Now, the correct terminology when you set the wheel is called top plate angle, and this is called top plate. Reason being that they're both called the same name is because it's a compound beveled angle, meaning that it's got two angles. So that's why we say top plate angle, 25 degrees. Top plate cutting angle, this is the wheel, comes in at a 25 degree angle. Okay, so 25 degrees and 25 degrees. Adjusted the backstop so that the wheel touches the tooth. And this is a brand new chain, never used. And we're going to zoom in there, and you'll see this wheel set up as it comes in. And look at that. That's probably as good as what you're going to get. That's the side of the wheel, and there's your Hexa. There's your 120 degrees there. So your 120 degrees, you got 60 degrees here, and you've got another 60 degrees going down. So there's your 120 degrees there. And you've got it on the other side as well. So yeah, that's the way that it is. So that's set up perfect, and that's the way that I like to set it up. A bit of a perfectionist. I like to get it perfect if possible. And now what we'll talk about is the dressing of the wheel, how to maintain that. So that's the next step. Now, to dress the stone on Hexa, you can, as described before, you can hold it and do it by hand like that and use the gauge. That's one way. that's probably the most way that people do it. I actually made this piece of stainless steel metal, put a 60-degree little ramp on it, and it just sits in there like that. Lock it in a position, sit my grinding block and pull the wheel down and just touch it off and on. So if we zoom in there, and I get perfect 60 degrees. Then it's just a matter of turning it around the other side and locking that into position. I'll just bring it over about there, a little bit more, and bring the wheel down, and it'll do the other side and just move it backwards and forwards. So that's how I do it. Yeah, look, I'm probably a bit of a perfectionist, so, but if you wanted to do it that way, you could certainly do it that way. Even if you didn't make it out of stainless steel, you could certainly make it out of plastic ice cream container lid or something like that there. It just means that it guarantees me that it's dead accurate. Yes, I can still use this, even that method, but this guarantees, this takes all the guesswork out for me. This takes every bit of guesswork out. And that means that if I dress the wheel using this, it's the same angle over and over again. How often do you actually dress the wheel? Not a huge amount. When I say not a huge amount, maybe every 3 or 4 chains, you might just barely touch it a little bit. Don't need to go overboard, just a little bit every now and then. And that's pretty much it. So, yeah. So what we're going to do next is exactly the same thing on the Oregon type grinder. And just there's a few different variations. Now, just to go over one other thing that we mentioned before on the Stihl, that on the Oregon style grinders, vertical is 90 degrees and there's 0 degrees over there. Whereas on a Stihl, 0 degrees is at the top and 90 degrees is at the bottom. So that's the difference. Exactly the same angle, it's just that the reference point is different. So we'll have a look at the wheel now. Now the wheel that you use is a 4.7 millimeter wheel in the width. So the width of the wheel is 4.7 mil. And you'll notice the 2 angles on here. You'll see the side angle there has been taken 15 degrees off and another 15 degrees on the bottom here. So if we look at a normal right angle, which is 90 degrees, we add another 15 degrees on the side. So we've got an extra 15 degrees here, an extra 15 degrees here, 30 and 90. There's your 120 degrees. So the width of this angle here that I dressed is probably about 5 millimeters, and the width here is probably around about 3 millimeters. And this is why I like to use a brand new Stihl Hexa chain as my template when dressing the wheels, because otherwise I'm guessing, and that's not a good idea. So what I've done here, I've got a 15-degree wedge down the bottom. You'll see this wedge here that I've got, so that's a 15-degree wedge. So that means if I sit my grinding block on here and I bring the wheel down, and I'll just drop the camera down so that you can see that. I want you to get a good view of that. That what we want to do is put a nice 15-degree angle on the horizontal of the wheel. I need to hold it on this side and just see whether I can come around here and you get a better view. I want to be able to, so that you can see that we've got it now a little gone too far. Just see whether we can get it a little bit better. Nothing worse than doing a video and you can't. I'll just bring the camera around where you'll see it good. There, that's better. So now you can see that if you set it up like that, it's just a matter of moving it backwards and forwards. Now, this piece of metal here is a bit of stainless steel, but you could make that out of plastic. Ice cream container lid or something out of plastic. So it's just using a protractor, 15 degrees. Very simple and straightforward. And that way you're sort of guaranteed that you're within the ballpark. And you just do that across the face of the wheel. That's all you got to do. Across the face of that wheel, put that 15 degree edge on there. So that's held at 15 degrees and that puts that edge on that wheel. That's it. Pretty simple. Okay, so then we take this wedge out and I've got another wedge. And that wedge is for the vertical and looks somewhat different. Because the last thing you want to do is make a mistake. Now, the same thing, this wedge, I'll just zoom back out. Approximately the rails are about 5 millimeters in width, and this is 15 degrees on either side. Because what we want to do is put a 15 degrees extra on the vertical of the wheel. I'm just going to set this up roughly, then I'll show you. Just bear with me. That's good enough. So roughly the point is almost in the middle. Just check that again. Let's make sure it's sitting properly. That's on 0. That's locked in. We'll zoom in so you can see that. So roughly this line here is roughly in line with the cam. That's going to hold the block at 15 degrees. So I can keep my fingers down here. And when the wheel comes in, as you can see, that's going to grind the wheel right at the right angle. If I want the wheel to come down further, that's just a matter of undoing the cam lock and moving the wheel back, and you can see it comes down further. Now again, that can be made out of, if you don't have access to metal tools, that can be made out of plastic. So normally it's the length of this bar here, close enough, as long as it goes past these 2 mountain screws and sits on top, and roughly in line. That point needs to be right on that edge, right in line with that, and that's all you need to do. And it's approximately, I think I'll just measure it, I think it's about 50 mil in height. Yep, 50 mil high. So this point from here to here is about 50 mil, 2 inches high. Alternatively, you can guess, but I don't like guessing. I always like to duplicate everything so that when I grind the chain up. Now, again, the same thing. This is a Hexa chain from Stihl, and we're going to set that up now. So we've set the wheel up, and now we're going to check. You may have to do some finer adjustments on the wheel. You may be able to do that freehand, but it's great to use a chain as a template. So our top plate angle on the Stihl is at 25 degrees. So that's our 25 degrees. Now, we need to set the grinder at 65 degrees. 65 degrees there, so, which is the same as the Stihl at 25 degrees. Because if we look at the angles that we put on the wheel, we added an extra 15 degrees on the side of the wheel, on the vertical, and we added an extra 15 degrees. That wheel should come in line, and we'll need to zoom right in there. That wheel should come into line with the tooth pretty good. I haven't set this up. I want to sort of set this up so that you can see it. That's not too bad. I want to see if I can get a better angle than that for you. Just going to lock that into position. Just going to drop this camera down a little bit to see whether I can actually get it better for you. You've got to spend a little bit of time in just setting up. Now that angles out a little bit. I'm just going to, I'll just sort of move that in the right spot. That's about it. So we'll tighten the wheel up. If you look, if you slightly, it needs to be a little bit more actually. That's about it. I remember when I did this one, see, depends on how you grind that wheel. And this is why I like to use that as a template. That's pretty good. You could get it a little bit better than that. You could get it a little bit better if you wanted to. But that's going to be okay. So that was an approximate. Yep. That was an approximate. You can fine tune it. You can fine tune that, but you can see that if you've got an original Stihl Hexa chain, that is to be used as your template, because if you make any mistakes, you're in trouble. Now, when I did this wheel last time, I did this all by freehand. Then I realised doing it by freehand, you're much easier to make mistakes. And that's when I decided that I would use, that I made these two things so that I got my 15 degrees on either side of the wheel to 120. But as I said, it's easy to make a mistake, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, even if they're using the Stihl USG grinder, if they're not dressing their wheel properly, then you may not get the right angle. Doesn't matter if you're out 1 or 2 degrees. It's really not going to do anything dramatic, but you probably don't want to be out too much more than that. Only one other thing I'd like to show you while I'm here is that, let's see if I can show it to you. Got this little mat that I made up. A little bit of a, and it fits over the bar here. It's a rubber mat, only about 1 mil. And I've got it on the Stihl USG grinder as well. And what it does, all the rubbish and the filings don't get all clogged up in the spring, and it doesn't eat away here. So it really protects the back of it. I've got it on the Stihl USG grinder as well. One I made for the Stihl fits over the white bar. So the little white bar that protrudes out, there's the hole. And then I put a little black cap on the end. So yeah, I could show you that one. Yeah, but anyway, I think you get the idea. So you could make one up yourself. It's just that you could even make them out of cardboard, disposable, if you will. So they're a great little idea. I got that off another guy. I can't remember his name, but he sent me a photo and said this is what I use. Makes it much cleaner, easy to clean up. Anyway, look, I hope that helps. That's just a little bit of a rundown on the various different ways. I did make a video in the past on the grinder where you could, so I was using 15 degrees. We'll just set this back up. You could use, in the past, I've done other profiles. When I first started doing the Hexa grind, there was profiles that I was using 10 degrees on one side and 20 degrees on the other. So look, you can mix and match. It doesn't have to be 15 degrees either side, but 15 degrees either side really does work good. Only one other thing that I would say is don't use the cheapest quality pink aluminium oxide wheels when doing this. Try and get a higher quality one which will work better. And try and get a fine one of about 80 grit. You don't want about 60 grit. You really want about 80 grit if possible. 100's even better, but very difficult to get 100 grit around. Anyway, look, thanks for watching. I hope that helps. That's an updated version of how I do Hexa on the USG, which is pretty straightforward on the USG because it's designed for it. And the Oregon grinder, it's just a matter of refacing the wheel and taking your time to do that. And I would advise you that it's probably a great idea that you get yourself a spare Hexa chain, especially if you're going to use Hexa a lot. Just keep a brand new chain there. Or the other alternative is, once you've set it up and you've got a brand new chain, if you've got a bit of an older half-worn chain, you could Hexa grind into that full chisel chain, and you could keep that as your template. Or if you've got an old chain, now maybe one other point that I didn't sort of bring to light was, yes, you can use this to sharpen your Hexa chain. That's what it's all about. But at the same time, if you've got a standard full chisel chain, and it's going to take a little bit longer, you can use your standard full chisel chain and turn it into a Hexa chain. The first pass is going to be, because you don't have that 120 degree profile in the full chisel, it'll take about twice as long to do. Dressing the wheel, you don't have to do it every chain, maybe every 3 or 4 chains. You might have to give it a very light touch. Very light touch, that's all. And I don't have a profile or a plastic card to check the wheel because, as I showed you before, Hexa have that for their wheel. So I haven't made one for this. That may be a project that I might do, make one for that. But at the moment, using the 2 pieces of 15 degree bits of metal really does work good. So, and the other thing is, if you actually look at that, you'll find out, I've just laid those 2 together. That is your 120 degree angle there. So there's your 15 degrees offset, there's your horizontal, there's your 15 degrees offset vertical, there's your 120 degrees. That's it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye.